Welcome to Chalice Unitarian Universalist Congregation. We are a community of diverse beliefs and experiences, nurturing the liberal religious spirit and united by our desire to grow in love and in service. Whoever you are, whomever you love, whatever your life's journey, you are welcome here. Whether you gather with us every Sunday, once or twice a year, or are with us this morning for the first time, we are glad you are here. I'm Reverend Sharon Wiley, Chalice's minister. Our worship musician this morning is Justin Gray. Welcome to this online worship service. Welcome to those of you watching Sunday morning using Zoom, and welcome to those of you who are watching the recording of the service later on Chalice's YouTube channel. For those of us using Zoom, please notice on your menu that there's a button that says CC Live Transcript. This is Zoom's closed captioning service. That's what CC stands for. And you can click on that to hide the subtitle or show the subtitle. If you want that function on or off, you're in control of whether that's happening on your screen or not. Also on your menu is the chat button. For those of you who like to use the chat box during the service, which you're welcome to do, please be sure that when you post, you use that little blue drop-down menu to select everyone. We like to use the chat for everyone to talk together. If you only chat with the host and panelists, that's just me. I'm all the panelists, and I may not see your message during the service, and I may not recognize that it only came to me. So let's all give ourselves a big hug of hello and welcome. If you're sharing space with someone and they consent to hugging, can hug each other. Finally, I want to especially welcome those of you who are newcomers at Chalice this morning. Towards the end of the service, I'll put a link in the chat box for adding your name to our email list. Our weekly email is the best way to get information about the many groups and activities we offer, most of which are still happening using Zoom, but some of which are starting to have in person. And for example, today we're having an in-person gathering this afternoon. So we'd love to see you at Chalice at 2 o'clock this afternoon, and we'd love to have your name added to our email list. Now, let's take a breath together.
A land acknowledgement is an honest and historically accurate way to recognize the traditional First Nations of a place. It commemorates Indigenous peoples' principal kinship to the land and the fact that they have not been and cannot be erased from their collective First Mother, the land. It is a starting place to change how the land is seen and talked about, according to Wanda Nannybush of the Anishinaabe Nation in Ontario. For non-Indigenous communities, a land acknowledgement is a powerful way of showing respect and honor for the Indigenous people of the land on which we work and live. It is a way of resisting the erasure of Indigenous histories and working towards honoring and inviting the truth. It is a stepping stone to honoring broken treaty relationships. It is an act of reconciliation. Land acknowledgements are not about placing blame, nor are they intended to restore white comfort. They are prayerful, they are personal, with carefully chosen and accurate language. In honoring Indigenous peoples, we strive to learn the pronunciation of their names. Land acknowledgements recognize how systemic and institutional systems of power have oppressed Indigenous people, and how that oppression has historically influenced the way non-Indigenous peoples perceive and interact with them, in the past as well as in the present. And so, I offer this land acknowledgement. I acknowledge that I live, work, and raise my family on stolen land, the ancestral homeland of the Piamkouicham and the Kumeyaay nations, a people who have been living, working, and raising families on this land of their ancestors for countless generations. People who have an enduring connection to this land that can never be erased. People for whom their deep relationship with this land of their ancestors is inseparable from who they are. People who consider this land and everything around them to be part of their enduring family.
Now we light our chalice, the symbol of our Unitarian Universalist faith. Our chalice lighting words are from Cindy Feskin. We are all capable in different ways with various strengths and talents. We are all holy, parts of the universe and the interdependent web. We light this chalice, cherishing our differences and holding each other in sacredness. May this chalice flame burn brightly, that its light may shine for everyone.
Today is the fourth in a series of 10 spotlights on Black composers. Previous spotlights included Samuel Coleridge Taylor, Florence Price, and Scott Joplin. Today, our spotlight shines on Nathaniel Dett, a Canadian-American Black composer, organist, pianist, choral director, and music professor. Nathaniel Dett was born in 1882 in Drummondville, Ontario, Canada. Nathaniel's mother was a native of Drummondville, and his father was from the United States. At age 11, Dett's parents moved the family to Niagara Falls, New York. From this point forward, Dett would live, study, and work almost exclusively in the United States. The young Nathaniel showed an early interest in the piano at age 3, starting lessons at 5. This started a lifetime of learning for Nathaniel. He was the first African American to receive a Bachelor of Music degree from Ohio's Oberlin College in 1908. He continued to take every opportunity to study at prestigious colleges and universities throughout the United States, including Harvard in 1920 and 21. At the age of 49, after being awarded honorary doctorates in music from both Howard University and Oberlin College, Dett decided to get his master's degree from the Eastman School of Music in 1931. Nathaniel Dett was a gifted and inspiring teacher and director. In 1913, he began teaching at the Hampton Institute in Virginia, where he later became the first Black director of music there. Under his direction, the Hampton Singers became an internationally recognized ensemble specializing in African American sacred music. Nathaniel Dett was one of the most prolific composers of his time. He published over 100 compositions, primarily piano, vocal, and choral works. His compositions as a teenager and young adult reflected the ragtime and dance music popular at the time. But everything changed after Dett heard a performance of Antonin Dvorak's American String Quartet at Oberlin College. Dvorak's signature style incorporates folk music elements from his native Bohemia into his classical compositions. When Nathaniel Dett heard Dvorak's quartet, some of the folk themes reminded him of the spirituals that his grandmother used to sing to him when he was a child. Dett recalls, quote, "Suddenly it seemed I heard again the frail voice of my long-departed grandmother calling across the years, and in a rush of emotion which stirred my spirit to its very center, the meaning of the songs which had given her soul such peace was revealed to me." Unquote. From then on, Dett was passionately committed to bringing the music of Black America, especially spirituals, into his work, using sophisticated compositional innovations to do so. He would go on to compile and arrange collections of spirituals, and is considered a seminal figure in the preservation and study of spirituals. In 1937, the NBC radio network was carrying a live broadcast of the Cincinnati Symphony and May Festival Chorus performing Nathaniel Dett's new oratorio, The Ordering of Moses. An oratorio is a large-scale musical work for orchestra and choir, usually based on a religious narrative, but performed without costumes or scenery. Handel's Messiah is an oratorio. The 1937 performance of Dett's oratorio was the world premiere, featuring a 350-voice choir. The network had slated 1 hour for the broadcast, but curiously, 40 minutes in, the NBC announcer broke in stating, quote, "We are sorry indeed, ladies and gentlemen, but due to previous commitments, we are unable to remain for the closing moments of this excellent performance," unquote. While no one knows for certain why the broadcast was cut short, there are many corroborating accounts of white radio listeners calling into NBC's Southern affiliate stations, outraged that a black man would be allowed on the stage of Cincinnati Music Hall. Indeed, the 1937 performance of The Ordering of Moses was very possibly the first network broadcast of a major work by an African American composer. Although the radio listeners did not hear the conclusion of the work, those lucky enough to be in the hall for the performance that night heard every note all the way to the end. Nathaniel Dett, who was in attendance, received an enthusiastic standing ovation. 77 years later, in 2014, the Cincinnati Symphony and May Festival Chorus once again presented a live broadcast of The Ordering of Moses. This time with a few changes. The performance venue was Carnegie Hall. The conductor, James Conlon. The most striking difference was that the 2014 live broadcast proceeded without interruption. What did not change was the triumphant success of Dett's new oratorio, which once again received an enthusiastic standing ovation.
Each year, I pick a topic for us to study deeply over the course of the church year, called our Spirit Study topic. The main expression of our Spirit Study is a series of 10 sermons, one per month, beginning in September and going through June. During the course of our anti-racism work over the past few years, we've heard again and again to center the voices and experiences of marginalized peoples, and for white people to do less talking and more listening. And so I started to think about how great it would be for us to listen to some of our Black UU preachers, especially now that using video has opened us up to being able to hear from people who are outside our local area. So I've invited 10 UU preachers to preach for us over the course of 10 months, one service a month, and they're invited to preach on any topic they choose. Today is the 4th sermon in this series. Our preacher this morning is the Reverend Kimberly Quinn Johnson. She is the minister of the UU congregation of the South Fork on the east end of Long Island in Bridgehampton, New York, where she has served for 6 years. Reverend Johnson has been generous in providing us with several components of worship in addition to the sermon. So please join me in welcoming her as she leads our call to worship.
We Are One by the Reverend Hope Johnson. We are one, a diverse group of proudly kindred spirits, here not by coincidence, but because we choose to journey together, We are active and proactive. We care deeply. We live our love as best we can. We are one, working, eating, laughing, playing, singing, storytelling, sharing and rejoicing, getting to know each other, taking risks, opening up, questioning, seeking, searching, trying to understand, struggling, making mistakes, paying attention, asking questions, listening, living our answers, learning to love our neighbors, learning to love ourselves, apologizing and forgiving with humility, and being forgiven through grace, creating the beloved community together. We are one.
This morning marks the third Sunday in the season of Advent. In the Christian tradition, Advent is the beginning of the church year, recognizing the transforming power of God in the world and looking forward toward the birth of Jesus and the celebration of spiritual light. Each week until Christmas, we light a new candle on the Advent wreath. When so much asks for our attention, the lighting of one candle after another reminds us that this season must pass in its own time. Birth cannot be rushed. We have the choice to be awakened and fully inhabit the present moment. The light of Advent grows brighter and brighter as we celebrate our coming together as a community. This morning, we light the third candle. We light this candle as a symbol of joy, not just any simple cheer, but the experience of joy that cannot be contained. Advent asks us to proclaim our gladness as a gift to the world, even when sorrow and uncertainty abound. May we share our hearts through our words, our music, and the way we live our lives. Let the fullness of our joy lead to more freedom.
Our Advent hymn this year is from our gray hymnal, number 226, People Look East. Please join in singing.
People look east, the time is near of the crowning of the year. Make your house fair as you are able. Trim the hearth and set the table. People look east and sing today. Love, the guest is on the way. Furrows be glad, the earth is bare. One more seed is planted there. Give up your strength, the seed to nourish, that in course the flower may flourish. People look east and sing today. Love, the rose is on the way. Stars keep the watch when night is dim. One more light the bowl shall bring, shining beyond the frosty weather, bright as the sun and moon together. People look east and sing today. Love, the star is on the way.
Our Sunday worship is the shared spiritual practice of our community. and we tend to the congregation during this time by sharing and honoring our joys and sorrows. If you'd like to share a joy or sorrow with the congregation this morning, now is the time for sharing in the chat box. These aren't spoken out loud and they don't become part of the recording. If you'd like to send me a confidential note about your joy or sorrow, or to make a prayer request, please email me and I'll put my email address in the chat box.
This is a once upon a time or a maybe upon a time story adapted from George Revis. It's called The Animal School. So once upon a time, the animals in the great forest started a school because they valued education, because they wanted to share their knowledge, because they wanted everyone to know how to do all of the same things. And so they organized the school. They hired a staff. They set up the curriculum. It included swimming and running, climbing, and flying. And because they valued knowledge and wanted to share everything amongst everyone, all of the animals took all of the classes. The ducks, it turned out, were excellent at swimming. They were the best. They took to swimming like a duck to water. But despite having wings, they were not that great at flying, and they were terrible at running. And so their instructors put them in remedial running class. And they spent so much time in remedial running class that they had to drop swimming. And so eventually, they were just okay at swimming. Now, the rabbits were the best at running, though they were poor at swimming. They just kept hopping around everywhere. Eventually, they were diagnosed as hyperactive. And so their teachers thought about how they could control that energy. And so they put them in extra swimming classes. But the swimming did not agree with their fur. Now, the squirrels, as you might expect, were excellent at climbing and running. They were, quite frankly, the stars. They were even good at flying, except they did their flying in this funny way where they were gliding down from the tops of trees, which was not exactly the way that the instructors wanted. They wanted them to go from the ground and fly up. From the ground and fly up. And since the squirrels couldn't get this, they gave them physical therapy. Now, the eagles, it turned out, were the real problem. The eagles had flying hands down. And at climbing class, they beat everyone else to the top. But that's because to get to the top, they flew, not actually climbing. And so their instructors sought to give the eagles extra classes. But the eagles refused. They insisted that it was the goal that mattered. And so they didn't take the extra classes. The teachers wanted them to improve their running and their forearm strength, but they stubbornly refused those classes also. The eagles insisted that their wings were perfect. They didn't need to run exactly like the rabbits. They didn't need to climb just like the squirrels. They had no interest in swimming. Why? They asked. Why spend their time learning to glide through the water like a duck if they could glide through the air like themselves? Well, the teachers were not happy, but it did give them something to think about. And it certainly gave the other students and the parents something to think about. I can't tell you how the story ends, but I wonder if we might write that ending together. This reading is from the Reverend Teresa Inés Soto. I cannot prove to you that I am, we are human. I cannot prove to you that I am a person, but you can hold my hand, cool and dry, while we pray, or just breathe, ragged breaths catching on our aching ribs. I cannot prove to you that brown skin is holy, that black skin is sacred, but you can know it, luminous and irrepressible, the tabernacle of your own liberation. I cannot prove to you that every queer body, every trans and NB body, every ace and bisexual body sings back to the universe its immense generative power of yes. I cannot prove to you with quadratic certainty that what a disabled body holds is a story of wisdom beyond perfection, like a red sun emerging from behind a cloud of dust. So the answers that I have for a country hacking up a death rattle and a democracy with a wheezing, waxy pallor are about our courage to love, our desperation, not only for survival, but also to tread above the worst of our collective nature and to get each other free, unashamed that there came a day when we were willing to risk looking foolish, to simply stay together and alive. This reading is an excerpt from Women Redefining Difference by Audre Lorde. It was delivered at Amherst College in 1980 for a women's studies colloquium. I will let Audre Lorde introduce herself to you. She writes, as a 49-year-old Black lesbian feminist socialist mother of two, including one boy, and a member of an interracial couple, I usually find myself a part of some group defined as other, deviant, inferior, or just plain wrong. Traditionally, in American society, it is the members of oppressed, objectified groups who are expected to stretch out and bridge the gap between the actualities of our lives and the consciousness of our oppressor. For in order to survive, those of us for whom oppression is as American as apple pie have always had to be watchers, to become familiar with the language and manners of the oppressor, even sometimes adopting them for some illusions of protection. Whenever the need for some pretense of communication arises, those who profit from our oppression call upon us to share our knowledge with them. In other words, it is the responsibility of the oppressed to teach the oppressors their mistakes. Institutionalized rejection of difference is an absolute necessity in a profit economy which needs outsiders as surplus people. As members of such an economy, we have all been programmed to respond to the human differences between us with fear and loathing, and to handle that difference in one of three ways. Ignore it. And if that is not possible, copy it if we think it's dominant, or destroy it if we think it's subordinate. But we have no patterns for relating across our human differences as equals. As a result, those differences have been misnamed and misused in the service of separation and confusion. Certainly, there are very real differences between us of race, age, and sex, but it is not those differences between us that are separating us. It is rather our refusal to recognize those differences and to examine the distortions from which result from our misnaming them and their effects upon human behavior and expectation. Racism, the belief in the inherent superiority of one race over all others, and thereby the right to dominance. Sexism, the belief in the inherent superiority of one sex over the other, and thereby the right to dominance. Ageism, heterosexism, elitism, classism. Too often, we pour the energy needed for recognizing and exploring difference into pretending those differences are insurmountable barriers or that they do not exist at all. The result is voluntary isolation or false and treacherous connections. Either way, we do not develop tools for using human difference as a springboard for creative change within our lives. We speak not of human difference, but of human deviance. Refusing to recognize difference makes it impossible to see the different problems and pitfalls facing us as women, as people. The need for unity is often misnamed as a need for homogeneity. As a Black lesbian feminist comfortable with the many different ingredients of my identity, and a woman committed to racial and sexual freedom from oppression, I find I am constantly being encouraged to pluck out some one aspect of myself and present this as the meaningful whole, eclipsing or denying the other parts of self. But this is a destructive and fragmenting way to live. My fullest concentration of energy is available to me only when I integrate all the parts of who I am openly, allowing power from one particular source of my living to flow back and forth freely through all of my different selves, without the restrictions of externally imposed definition. Only then can I bring myself and my energies as a whole to the service of those struggles which I embrace as part of my living. It is not our differences which separate us as women, but our reluctance to recognize those differences and to deal effectively with the distortions which have resulted from ignoring and misnaming those differences. When I want to describe for people what it means to be a Unitarian Universalist, I usually point to our first and our seventh principles as two pillars, two opposite poles of our faith. The first principle affirms the inherent worth and dignity of each and every person. And the seventh principle affirms that we, each and every one of us, are part of an interdependent web of existence. Together, these two present the paradox of our faith: individuality or independence versus relationship or interdependence. On the one hand, the first principle asks us to consider what is unique and singular about each of us. On the other hand, this seventh principle asks us to consider the ways that we are interconnected, the ways that we are linked. Linked in what Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. called the inescapable network of mutuality, a single garment of destiny. How do we hold these two conflicting and complementary principles? Our individuality and the diversity that flows from that, and our sameness, what holds us together. I recognize the challenge here. In a world and a political climate, not just in this country, but around the globe, where we are more divided than ever, there is a longing to hold on to cling to the ways that we are connected. And yet this longing to cling to the things that hold us together often slides into what Audre Lorde described as a refusal to acknowledge our differences, a fear of approaching our differences with rigor and seriousness. I want to talk first about the fear. What I hear in this fear is actually a real tenderness, a wariness about getting it wrong or not knowing how to get it right. Sometimes this is expressed as exasperation with political correctness, chafing at the expectation that we talk and behave in ways that are sensitive, sometimes described as too sensitive to those around us. Sometimes it's expressed as being confounded by the changes in language, the changes in the very terms that we use to identify ourselves and others. We don't want to be called out as racist or sexist or ableist or classist or just plain wrong. We don't want to be wrong. I get that. It can feel as if we are navigating a shifting landscape, a rapid revolution, too rapid. How can we keep up with the shifting ground so swiftly around us? I grew up in a time when African American was the polite way to describe my race, and then people of color to describe a more inclusive identity, and then Black to suggest a more politically affirmative identity. And now, all of a sudden, in what feels like a year, everyone is using BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color. Unless we're talking about Latinx people with an X, no longer simply Latino or Latina, or even Hispanic. And recently I have heard Latin, no X or A or O, Latin. Growing up gay and lesbian was an appropriate terminology. More recently, LGBT, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender, and now LGBTQI+. A decade ago, differently abled felt like a politically correct, or at least a polite, way to refer to people who are disabled. Now, our disabled siblings are telling us something different. They tell us that this and other alternatives can feel disempowering, patronizing, and hurtful. Euphemisms like challenged, handy-capable, differently abled, special needs only serve to mask the speaker's discomfort with difference. And while these euphemisms may make people who are not disabled feel comfortable, they do nothing to address the ways that our society and our institutions are organized to accommodate certain kinds of bodies and not others. The fact is, language matters. Words have power, and they influence the ways that we think about the world and the people around us. But this is not only about having the correct words or the correct language. This is about our willingness to change and to grow, our willingness to be vulnerable in our imperfection. It is about our willingness to listen and to follow the lead of directly impacted people. Quite simply, it is about respect. Our language is always changing. The question is, are we willing and able to change with it? Are we willing and able to make the effort to try to see others and to acknowledge our differences with openness and curiosity and not fear? Are we willing to be, as activist Mary Hookes mandates, transformed in the service of the work? I think that willingness comes from love. And when I talk about love here, I mean the fierce love that Reverend King talked about when he stood before the Southern Christian Leadership Conference in 1967. He said, "I'm not talking about emotional bosh when I talk about love. I'm talking about a strong, demanding love. I'm talking about the love that King describes as the only force capable of transforming an enemy into a friend." The point is not to be perfect, but to do our best to try with open-heartedness, to enter into relationships, to deepen relationships with a willingness to forgive ourselves and others. I know this is hard work, and it can feel scary. And some of us, probably you, because I know I sometimes do. I sometimes wish we could return to a time when we knew the rules and we were safe in our expressions and our interactions. But cultural theorist Bell Hooks reminds us that the practice of love offers no place of safety. We risk loss, hurt, pain. We risk being acted upon by forces outside our control. I'll say that twice because it's so important. The practice of love offers no place of safety. We risk loss, hurt, pain. We risk being acted upon by forces outside of our control. Far too often, I witness the ways that we in our congregations and in our lives fall into the pitfall that Lorde describes of refusing to acknowledge difference. I hear things like, "We're all the same," or "I don't see color," or LGBXYZ, none of that matters. Please believe me when I tell you it matters. It matters when people see you. And it matters when they don't. I think I know what people mean when they say we're all the same. They're pointing to, I think, the sense that we are all human, that there is something about us that connects us, that draws us together into a human family, or if we're really stretching, together into the family of earth beings, human and non-human alike, our expansive, interdependent web of life. But behind the sentiment, underneath the insistence that we are all the same, lies the sense that we need to be the same in order to be able to care about each other, in order to love each other. My question here is, do I have to be like you in order for you to love me? Do I have to be like you in order for you to care about me and my life? Can you love me even when I am different from you? And when I talk about love here, I don't mean like me a lot. I don't mean want to have me around. I most definitely don't mean a superficial diversity that I bring to your spaces. I mean, again, that demanding love that Reverend King talks about. I mean love as an act of will that Bell Hooks talks about. She writes that love is the will to extend oneself for the purpose of nurturing one's own or another's spiritual growth. Love is, Bell Hooks writes, as love does. Love is an act of will, namely both an intention and an action. Will also implies choice. We do not have to love. We choose to love. When we understand love as the will to nurture our own and another's spiritual growth, it becomes clear that we cannot claim to love if we are hurtful and abusive. Love and abuse cannot coexist. Love, in my own words, means that we try to know each other. Love means that we fight for each other. When I'm faced with the refusal to acknowledge difference, the very real and obvious differences that mark our lives, that shape our opportunities, that color our access to power and safety, it raises the question, how can I trust you? How can I trust you if you don't see me? If you don't see and understand the ways that I am different, the ways that my life is constrained and oppressed, how can I trust you if you can't acknowledge the real threat and danger that I face? And even if after I tell you, you still refuse to acknowledge it, instead clinging to this myth of sameness, how can I trust you to fight against the things that oppress me if you refuse to acknowledge the things that make us different? Race, sex, class, ability, age? If you refuse to acknowledge the things that make our lives different, racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, classism, ableism, ageism, how can I trust you to have my back? How can I trust you to fight with me against these things? Nobody is asking for perfection. At least people of good faith are not asking for perfection. We're asking for you to try to see each other, try to understand each other, try to know each other, and don't hide behind the impossibility of perfection. This idea that you can't possibly know someone different. And since you can't possibly get it right, well, then why even bother trying? There is a tendency to feel embarrassment or shame when we make mistakes, when we get things wrong, especially when we get things wrong in ways that don't represent who we really believe we are. When we get things wrong in ways that don't represent who we want to be. But there is no room for shame here. The stakes are too high to hide behind that. I have committed myself in my life to Unitarian Universalist ministry because I believe so deeply in our possibility and our promise, in our power to transform the world in big ways and small ways. I believe in our promise to unleash this powerful love on the world around us. That is beloved community. That is collective liberation. But how can we possibly hope to be a part of healing the fractures in our community and in our nation and our world when we cannot heal the fractures at home, when we won't even see them? 40 years ago, Audre Lorde shared, I am constantly being encouraged to pluck out some one aspect of myself and present this as a meaningful whole, eclipsing or denying the other parts of self. But this is a destructive and fragmenting way to live. My fullest concentration of energy is available to me only when I integrate all the parts of who I am, openly allowing power from particular sources of my living to flow back and forth freely through all my different selves, without the restrictions of externally imposed definition. Only then can I bring myself and my energies as a whole to the service of those struggles which I embrace as part of my living. She challenged us to develop tools for using human difference as a springboard for creative change within our lives. Friends, the world needs people who are whole. People who, like Lorde, can bring ourselves and our energies as a whole to the service of those struggles that we commit our lives to. The world needs people who can live fully into themselves. People who aren't forced to hide or deny parts of themselves in order to honor our connections. We do not have to think alike to love alike. We do not need to ignore our very real and obvious differences to realize unity. Instead, rather than ignore difference, we can develop tools, skills, and capacity for using difference as that springboard for creative change within our lives and our communities, with courage and vulnerability, and definitely not perfection. We can write this story together.
One of the many gifts of community that we adults miss while we worship online is seeing the children on Sunday mornings at their religious education classes. The children and youth have been having in-person outdoor classes at Chalice for quite a while now. So we have some photos to share so you can see a bit what they've been doing recently. The Sunday offering is an expression of the generosity that makes our congregational life possible. As Buddhist teacher Christina Feldman writes, generosity lies at the heart of spiritual practice. Extending generosity to ourselves and others gladdens our heart, is a direct way of healing division, and brings joy. We're taking a special collection this morning. Here's Callie Leaf to tell you more.
Hello, Chalice. My name is Callie Leaf, and I am currently the lead of the coordinating team. I'm here today to speak to you about our extraordinary Chalice executive staff, consisting of Tim McKnight, our music director, Chris O'Connor, our director of family ministries, and Kathleen Swift, our office administrator. These folks have gone above and beyond again this year as we continue to very slowly return to face-to-face events at Chalice, while keeping up our online presence and activities. Tim has continued to lead the music program with inspiring vocal and instrumental music for online worship, as well as resuming in-person rehearsals for the chancel choir and hand chime ensemble with all the appropriate COVID safety measures in place. Chris has nearly single-handedly been holding in-person religious education classes this year, which has allowed our youth to get reacquainted and establish many positive memories. She's also been the lead of the patio cover task force, which worked very hard to develop a lovely shade structure design for our courtyard. You'll hear more about our new courtyard cover in the January newsletter. Kathleen stepped into the office administrator position this past June and made an immediate positive impact. Her work requires her to track and juggle dozens of different tasks and projects while being the main point of contact for congregant questions and concerns. She's the calm and steady center of everything that's happening at Chalice. While it's not possible to budget for bonuses for these hardworking staff members through our operations fund, I am today asking you to consider an additional donation so that we can provide a year-end bonus for each of them. You may text your donation to the number that will appear on the screen momentarily. Please add the word "helping" after the amount. You may also send a check to Chalice with staff bonus written in the memo line. Text donations or checks need to be received by Tuesday, December 21st. Together, we can provide a well-deserved bonus for Tim, Chris, and Kathleen, our incomparable Chalice executive staff. Thank you very much, and happy holidays to all.
Please join in dedicating our offering with words of affirmation. As Unitarian Universalists, we gather to affirm and promote acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations.
Listen to the lambs, all are crying. Listen to the lambs, all are crying. Listen to the lambs, all are crying. All are crying. All are crying.
Before we close the service, I'd like to remind newcomers to please use the link in the chat box to add your name to our email list. I know many of us are looking forward to gathering in person this afternoon, and as we're moved by Reverend Johnson's words and sermon this morning, I want to invite us to recognize when we gather in person, we've been using a sticker system of green, yellow, and red to let people know how comfortable you feel or don't feel with people getting close to you. And we've had feedback from when we've done this at the park that people with red stickers feel different. So I just invite you to be aware of that. Again, that we're being asked to be aware of what we think, who we think we are, and what real difference is, and how can we honor and respect those. So after closing words from Reverend Johnson, you are invited to close our time together by singing the well, and then everyone is invited to coffee hour.
From Margaret Kelp, as surely as we belong to the universe, we belong to each other. We join here to transcend the isolated self, to reconnect, to know ourselves to be at home here on earth under the stars, linked with each other.